Hey everyone, welcome back. Before we dive into this story, and trust me, this one gets wild, I have to know, where is my wolf pack hiding today? Drop your city or country in the comments below, and I love seeing how far our pack reaches. And if you haven't joined the family yet, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell right now. You do not want to miss what happens next. There are 3 rules to surviving the neutral territory, the lawless strip of land between the warring shifter packs. 1. Keep your head down. 2. Never, under any circumstances, go out after midnight. And 3, and this is the important one, never mistake the Alpha King of the North for a golden retriever. If I had known that the massive, muddy beast I dragged in from the storm was actually King Xander, the most lethal warlord in the continent's history, I probably would have left the door locked. I definitely wouldn't have given him a tummy rub, and I certainly wouldn't have put a plastic cone of shame on him to stop him from licking his stitches. "You put a cone on me, little nurse?" he had rumbled later, his voice deep enough to vibrate the floorboards of my clinic. "I thought you would bite your stitches," I had defended myself, terrified. "Oh, I'm going to bite something," he had promised, locking the door with a terrifying click. "It won't be stitches." My name is Ria. I'm a vet nurse with terrible eyesight and a heart too big for my own good. I thought I was saving a stray dog. Instead, I dragged a naked, 7-foot-tall alpha into my bed. He's lethal, he's possessive, he has locked us inside. And the worst part? He wants to return the favor. "Beg for me, puppy," he whispered against my ear. And God help me, I think I'm going to. Chapter 1. The Stormy Night. The rain hammered against the corrugated tin roof of the infirmary like 1,000 tiny fists demanding entry. It was a relentless, drowning downpour that turned the dirt roads of the neutral territory into rivers of sludge. I sighed, wiping my hands on my stained apron, the smell of antiseptic clinging to my skin like a second perfume. It was midnight. My shift had technically ended 3 hours ago, but in the neutral territory, sickness didn't keep office hours. I was the only nurse on duty at the Paws and Claws clinic, and the flu season was hitting the lower packs hard. The silence of the empty waiting room was heavy, broken only by the hum of the old refrigerator and the storm raging outside. I moved to lock the medicine cabinet, my fingers fumbling with the keys. My eyesight was terrible without my glasses, which I had, in my infinite wisdom, managed to leave on my bedside table at home again. The world beyond a 3-foot radius was a soft, blurry watercolor painting of grays and muted blues. I squinted at the lock, trying to jam the key in, when a sound cut through the noise of the rain. Scritch, scritch. I froze, the keys jangling in my hand. The sound came from the back door, the heavy steel reinforced one that led to the alley. It wasn't a knock. No human knocked like that. It was a desperate scratching, low and frantic. "Hello?" I called out, my voice wavering slightly. I grabbed the heavy wooden broom I kept by the counter. Paranoia was a survival trait out here. "We're closed. Come back in the morning," I said. A low, pained whimper answered me. It was a sound of pure misery, the kind that bypassed my brain and tugged directly at my heartstrings. It was an animal, probably a stray dog looking for shelter from the freezing deluge. I had a weakness for strays that bordered on pathological. My tiny apartment was currently home to a 3-legged cat named Tripod and a hamster with an attitude problem. I couldn't leave a creature out in this weather. I unlocked the heavy bolts of the back door and pushed it open against the wind. I gasped as the cold rain lashed my face. Slumped on the wet cobblestones was a massive, dark shape. Even with my terrible vision, I could tell it was huge, easily the size of a small pony or a very large Great Dane. It was covered in mud and matted black fur, a heap of misery in the darkness. A dog, I thought, squinting through the driving rain. A really, really big dog. "Oh, you poor thing," I cooed, dropping the broom immediately. Survival instincts vanished. The nurse instinct took over. "You're hurt." I knelt in the mud, ruining my scrubs instantly. The creature growled, a low, rumbling warning that vibrated deep in my chest. It was a terrifying sound, primal and dangerous. Most people would have run. Most people would have realized that dogs didn't growl with that kind of subsonic frequency. I just tutted, shaking my head. "None of that," I said firmly, reaching out. "I am a nurse. I'm going to help you. Come on, big guy." I grabbed the creature by its front paws. They were oddly thick, the joints heavy and solid. I pulled, bracing my feet against the slick threshold. He was dead weight, heavy as a boulder. "Okay," I grunted, straining as I dragged him inch by inch. "You definitely need a diet. Less kibble and more cardio, mister." With a final straining heave that nearly threw out my back, I pulled the beast into the warm yellow light of the clinic and kicked the door shut against the storm. He lay there on the linoleum, a mound of wet fur, mud, and shivering muscle. "Right," I said, putting my hands on my hips and trying to catch my breath. "First things first, you need a bath, and then we'll see about that attitude." I didn't know it then, but I hadn't just dragged a stray dog into my clinic. I had dragged in the King of the North, and he was not going to be happy about the bath.
Chapter 2. Good Boy. The exam room smelled of rubbing alcohol, wet dog, and metallic ozone. I had managed, through a miracle of adrenaline and leverage, to heave the beast onto the sturdy metal exam table. He was barely conscious, his breathing ragged and wet. Up close, under the harsh fluorescent lights, he looked even bigger than he had in the alley. His fur was pitch black, darker than a moonless night, but there were patches of bare skin visible through the mats. It looked like he was suffering from hair loss, or maybe he was a specific breed I couldn't identify through the blur of my uncorrected vision. "Mange?" I muttered to myself, leaning in to squint at his flank. "Or maybe eczema? Poor puppy, that looks itchy." As if offended by the diagnosis, the puppy opened one eye. It wasn't a dog's eye. It was amber, glowing with an internal luminescence, and absolutely furious. He let out a snarl that started in his belly and ended in a display of teeth the size of daggers. They snapped inches from my face. I jumped back, colliding with the instrument tray. "Hey!" The beast tried to stand, his massive claws scrabbling as a purchase on the slippery metal table. He looked ready to launch himself at my throat. His muscles bunched, and that amber eye locked onto me with murderous intent. Without thinking, driven purely by the reflex of training unruly terriers, I reached out the nose. "No," I scolded, using my sternest, bad dog voice. "Bad boy, no biting." The effect was instantaneous. The beast froze. He blinked, the amber fire in his eye dimming into pure, unadulterated shock. He stared at me, mouth slightly open, as if I had just grown a second head or started speaking in tongues. The sheer audacity of a small human woman bopping a predator on the snout seemed to short-circuit his brain. "I am trying to help you," I told him, wagging a finger in his face as he stared at me in stunned silence. "If you bite me, I'm putting you in the cage with the mean cat. And Tripod does not share his toys. Do you understand?" The beast stared at me for a long, heavy second. Then slowly, he lowered his massive head back onto the metal table. He let out a huff of air that sounded suspiciously like a sigh of defeated disbelief. The tension left his frame, though his eyes watched me warily. "Good boy," I said, my voice softening instantly. I reached out and scratched him behind the ear, right in the sweet spot. His fur was coarse, stiff with mud, but warm underneath. "See, we can be friends. I'm not going to hurt you." He leaned into my touch, just a fraction. A low rumble started in his chest. It wasn't the threatening growl from before. It was deeper, rhythmic. A purr? Did dogs purr? I pushed the thought away. "Okay," I said, grabbing the surgical shears and a bucket of warm, soapy water. "You're going to be the handsomest boy in the shelter once we get you cleaned up." I dipped the sponge into the water, humming a soft tune. I could have sworn, as I turned back to him, that the massive black dog rolled his eyes at me.
Chapter 3. The Bath. Washing a 300-pound semi-shifted wolf was not easy. It was like trying to wash a very angry, very muddy bear who had a personal vendetta against hygiene. I soaked a large sponge in warm, soapy water and began to scrub his flank. The water in the bucket turned brown instantly. As the mud ran off in dark streams, it revealed skin that was not just scarred, but patterned. I squinted, bringing my face closer to his side. "Weird markings," I mumbled, tracing a black line that swirled across his ribs. "Maybe your previous owner was an artist, or some kind of fanatic." The beast flinched violently when I touched a particularly nasty gash on his shoulder. It was a jagged wound, oozing a strange, viscous green liquid that smelled like copper and rot. Poison. My stomach turned. This wasn't a car accident. This was an attack. "Shh," I whispered, switching to a soft, sterile cloth. I know it hurts. I've got you." I cleaned the wound with the utmost care, flushing out the green toxin. As I worked, I hummed a lullaby my grandmother used to sing. The beast watched me, his head resting on his paws. His amber eyes tracked my every movement, analyzing, calculating. He wasn't fighting me anymore. He was studying me, his gaze possessing an intelligence that was unnerving. I moved to wash his chest, needing to get the mud off his underside. My hand brushed against something that felt distinctly human. A pectoral muscle, hard as rock, defined and broad. I pulled my hand back, heat rushing to my cheeks. "You work out a lot for a dog," I noted, feeling ridiculous for blushing in front of an animal. "Whatever they're feeding you, it's working." I decided to skip the nether regions. The anatomy was confusing enough through the blur of my bad vision, and frankly, I didn't want to invade his privacy any more than necessary. "We'll, let that part self-clean," I decided, clearing my throat. I rinsed him off with clean water. He was shivering again, violently now. The poison and the shock were affecting his temperature regulation. The clinic was drafty at night, the storm finding every crack in the old masonry. "You can't stay on this cold table," I said, wringing out the towel. "And the kennels are full, plus the floor is concrete." I looked at the door to my small on-call bedroom at the back of the clinic. It was a tiny space, barely a closet, with a twin bed I used for overnight shifts. I looked back at the beast. He looked pathetic, wet and trembling, his big eyes fixed on me with a silent plea. I sighed, the sound of my own resignation loud in the quiet room. "Fine," I told him. "You can sleep with me, but no hogging the covers and absolutely no drooling on the pillow." The beast hopped off the table with a grace that belied his size. He stood on his hind legs for a split second, wobbling as if disoriented, before dropping back to all fours. He followed me into the bedroom, his tail giving a single tentative wag. Chapter 4. The Bed. My bed was a twin, barely big enough for me, let alone a human and a massive beast. With the creature taking up the entire foot of the mattress, I was practically clinging to the edge, one arm dangling off into the void. "Move over, Clifford," I grumbled, shoving his furry hip with my foot. "You weigh a ton." He didn't move. Instead, he shifted. He crawled up the mattress, the springs groaning under his weight, until his massive head was resting on the spare pillow next to mine. He was warm, incredibly warm. The heat radiating off him was like a blast furnace, searing through his damp fur and my thin scrubs. In the freezing draft of the clinic, he was a living radiator. Before I could protest, he threw a heavy paw over my waist. It pinned me in place, heavy and unyielding. It felt less like a dog cuddling and more like a possessive claim. "Okay," I squeaked, unable to move. "Cuddling it is, then." The storm raged outside, wind howling against the single window, but in the small room, it was strangely quiet. I lay there in the dark, listening to his breathing. It was deep and steady, a comforting rhythm that slowed my own racing heart. I turned my head on the pillow to look at him. His eyes were closed. In the shadows, the sharp angles of his face softened. He looked peaceful, less like a monster from the alley, more like a protector guarding the gate. A strange feeling settled over me. Living in the neutral territory, I was always afraid, always looking over my shoulder, but lying here, trapped under the weight of this strange beast, I felt safer than I had in years. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and stroked his muzzle. His fur was drying, becoming softer. "Sleep well, puppy," I whispered in the darkness. He let out a long breath, his cold nose nuzzling into the curve of my neck. His whiskers tickled my skin, sending a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I closed my eyes, falling asleep wrapped in the legs of a strange beast, unaware that I was cuddling the most dangerous predator in the kingdom.
Chapter 5. The Morning Reveal. Sunlight streamed through the broken blinds, hitting me right in the face with the subtlety of a slap. I groaned, trying to stretch, but my body met resistance. My bed felt crowded and hard and unmistakably warm. I wasn't hugging a pillow. My arm was thrown across a wall of skin. Warm, smooth, sun-kissed skin. I blinked, my sleep-addled brain trying to process the sensory input. Skin? Where is the fur? I opened my eyes. I wasn't looking at black fur. I was looking at a chest. A tanned, scarred, undeniably human chest. A chest with defined pectorals, a dusting of dark hair, and nipples. My gaze traveled up slowly, dread pooling in my stomach. Lying next to me, taking up 90% of the small bed, was a man. A giant of a man. He had long, dark hair that spread across my pillow like spilled ink. His jawline was sharp enough to cut glass, covered in a day's worth of stubble. And across his shoulder and chest were the same intricate tribal tattoos I had seen on the dog. He was also stark, raving, naked. I screamed. I scrambled backward, flailing wildly, and fell off the bed with a loud, undignified thump, tangling myself in the sheets. The man woke up instantly. He didn't startle, he simply sat up, muscles rippling across his back as he stretched. He looked around the room confused for a microsecond before his gaze landed on me, huddled on the floor. His eyes were amber, the same glowing amber eyes as the beast. A slow, lazy smirk spread across his face. It was a wicked expression, filled with arrogance and amusement. He leaned back against the headboard, crossing his arms behind his head, not bothering to cover himself in the slightest. "Morning, vet," he rumbled. His voice was deep, a gravelly baritone that rattled my teeth and did strange things to my insides. "Who? What? Where is the dog?" I stammered, frantically patting the nightstand for my glasses. I jammed them onto my face, and the world snapped into horrifyingly clear focus. He was gorgeous, and he was naked in my bed. "The dog needed a shave," he drawled, watching my panic with delight. "And a diet, apparently. Kibble, really?" My blood ran cold. He remembered. He remembered the bath. He remembered the tummy rub. He remembered the good boy. I pointed a shaking finger at him. You are a shifter." "I am King Xander," he corrected, his voice dropping an octave. "And you, little nurse, have excellent hands, but next time—" He leaned forward, the sheets slipping lower down his waist. His amber eyes danced with a predatory light. "Next time, You wash me? He purred. Don't skip the good parts. My vision went black at the edges, the room spun, and for the first time in my professional career, I fainted.
Chapter 6. The Lockdown. I woke up on the linoleum floor with a groan that rattled my ribcage. My back ached, my head pounded with a dull, rhythmic throb, and for a solid, blissful 10 seconds, I managed to convince myself that the last 12 hours had been a fever dream brought on by expired sushi. There was no giant wolf, there was no naked king in my bed. I was just a lonely nurse with an overactive imagination. Then, the giant moved. The sound of heavy feet hitting the floorboards shattered my delusion. My eyes snapped open just in time to see Xander, King Xander, I corrected myself with a shudder, moving across the room. He was out of the bed in a blur of motion that defied physics for a man of his size. The lazy, arrogant smirk he'd worn moments before I passed out was gone. In its place was a terrifying, razor-sharp focus. He didn't look like a patient anymore. He looked like a weapon. He moved to the small window, peering through the slats of the blinds, his body tense as a bowstring pulled to its breaking point. The muscles in his back coiled and released with every breath. "What are you doing?" I groaned, pushing myself up into a sitting position and rubbing my temples. "And for the love of all that is holy, please put some pants on." "Quiet," he hissed, not even glancing at me. The command was so sharp, so infused with natural authority that my mouth snapped shut before I could argue. I watched him, fear starting to curdle in my stomach. The playfulness from moments ago had evaporated. His amber eyes were scanning the street outside the clinic with predatory intensity. His nostrils flared, inhaling deeply, testing the air. "They found the trail," he growled, the sound low and dangerous. "My scent? It's faint. Hidden by the storm, but they are tracking it." "Who?" I asked, scrambling to my feet, suddenly feeling very small in my own bedroom. "The dog catchers?" Xander turned to me. The look in his eyes made my breath hitch. It wasn't the soft, confused puppy look from the night before. It was the king look, ancient, violent, and absolute. He said flatly, "Assassins. Lady Vesper's elite guard. They are called the Vipers for a reason. If they find me here, Rhea, they will burn this clinic to the ground with you inside it just to be sure I am dead." He didn't wait for my reaction. He strode past me, the air displacing around his massive frame, and marched into the main clinic area. "Wait!" I chased after him, skidding on the polished floor in my socks. "You can't just... What are you doing?" Click, clack, thud. Xander was at the front door. He wasn't just locking the deadbolt. He was engaging the heavy steel storm shutters I hadn't used in 5 years. He slammed the metal bars into place with a force that shook the walls. Then he moved to the back door, dragging a heavy metal filing cabinet across the floor with one hand as if it were made of styrofoam. "Hey!" I shrieked, watching my organization system crumble. "That is my filing cabinet. You're messing up my alphabetization." "I am saving your life," he corrected, slamming the last bolt of the back door home. He turned to me. The clinic was now plunged into semi-darkness, sealed off from the outside world by steel and stone. The air suddenly felt very small, very recycled, and very full of alpha pheromones. "We are locked in," he declared, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. "Until my strength returns fully, no one leaves and no one enters." I stared at him, wide-eyed. I was trapped in a small building with a 7-foot-tall alpha king who was being hunted by elite assassins. "I should have just bought a goldfish," I whispered to the empty room. "Goldfish don't have enemies." Chapter 7. The Negotiation. "You cannot keep me prisoner in my own workplace," I shouted, waving a clipboard for emphasis. It had been 20 minutes since the lockdown began, and my panic was rapidly morphing into indignation. Xander was sitting on the exam table. Thankfully, he had found a towel to wrap around his waist, though it was distressingly small on him, eating a protein bar he had scavenged from my desk drawer. He looked annoyingly calm, chewing with slow, deliberate movements while I practically vibrated with stress. "I am not keeping you prisoner," he said, swallowing a bite of the chocolate peanut butter bar. "I am enforcing a quarantine. Isn't that a medical procedure? You should be thanking me for my adherence to safety protocols." "That is for viruses, not for warlords." I threw the clipboard onto the counter. "I have patients coming at 8 a.m., Xander. Mrs. Higgins needs her gout medication. Little Timmy has a rash that needs looking at. I can't just disappear." "Mrs. Higgins can wait," he rumbled, his tone dismissing Mrs. Higgins to the void. "And Timmy will survive a rash. But if you open that door, Vesper's men will smell me, and then they will kill us both. Is that what you want? Do you want Timmy to find our charred remains?" I stopped pacing. I looked at him. Really looked at him. Despite his arrogant posture and the bulging muscles, he wasn't at full strength. The bandages on his shoulder were seeping red again. His skin was paler than it should have been. He was acting tough, posturing like the alpha he was, but he was hurt. "You're bleeding again," I pointed out, my voice losing its sharp edge. "It's nothing. A scratch." "It's not nothing. It's poison," I countered. I sighed, the fight draining out of me. I couldn't kick him out. Not if he was injured, and certainly not if there were killers waiting outside my door. My Hippocratic oath and my conscience wouldn't allow it. "Fine," I grumbled, crossing my arms. "We stay locked down, but I have conditions. This isn't a dictatorship, it's a co-op." Xander raised a dark eyebrow, looking amused. "Conditions? You are bargaining with a king." "I'm bargaining with a patient. 1, you put on clothes, real clothes. I have some spare scrubs in the back storage. 2, you don't break anything else. My insurance premiums are high enough." "Reasonable," he agreed, finishing the protein bar. "And 3, I paused, pointing a finger at him. I needed to be firm. I needed to set boundaries. I am your nurse, not your whatever. A slow, lazy smirk spread across his face. He leaned forward, the towel dipping dangerously low on his hips. His amber eyes flashed with that inner light, warm and dangerous. "I can agree to the clothes," he purred, his voice dropping to a velvet rumble. "And I will try not to break your toys. But the third one—" He licked his lips, a slow, deliberate movement that made my knees wobble. "I can't make any promises, nurse. You smell too good to ignore, like rain and vanilla. It makes a wolf hungry." I swallowed hard, clutching the counter for support. We were going to be trapped here for days. I was definitely in trouble.
Chapter 8. The Nurse. The scrubs were too small. It was hilarious, objectively speaking. The largest size I kept in the clinic stock was an XL, designed for the occasional burly vet tech. On Xander, they looked like painted-on activewear. The blue fabric strained violently across his chest, threatening to rip with every breath he took. The sleeves gripped his biceps like tourniquets. And the pants, well, the pants ended mid-calf, turning into unintended capris. But as I watched him hop onto the exam table, I found that I wasn't laughing. Because even in ridiculous, skin-tight blue scrubs, he looked lethal. If anything, the clothes just emphasized exactly how much power was packed into his frame. "Sit," I ordered, trying to summon my professional demeanor. "I need to change that dressing. The bleeding hasn't stopped." Xander complied, sitting quietly. He watched me as I gathered the fresh gauze, antiseptic, and tape. The air in the small room felt thick, charged with static. I stepped between his spread knees to reach his shoulder. It was an intimate position, unavoidable in the cramped space, but it forced me into his personal orbit. I could feel the heat radiating off him, a tangible wave of warmth.
I peeled back the old bandage. The wound was deep, claw marks from whatever nightmare creature had attacked him. I cleaned it with antiseptic, dabbing gently. He hissed, his muscles bunching hard under my hands. "Sorry," I murmured, blowing softly on the skin to cool the sting. "Almost done." I concentrated on my work, trying desperately to ignore the proximity. His chest was right there, broad, tanned, and covered in those fascinating tribal tattoos that seemed to shift slightly when he moved. My hand brushed his pectoral muscle as I taped the gauze down, and I felt the hard thump of his heart beneath the skin. Thump, thump, thump. It was beating fast. I paused, looking up. I expected him to be looking at the wound or the wall. Instead, Xander was looking directly at my face. His gaze was heavy, physical, like a touch. He wasn't looking at me like a patient looks at a nurse. He was looking at me like a starving man looks at a feast. "You have gentle hands," he said. His voice was a low rumble that went straight to my stomach, bypassing my brain entirely. For a woman who drags strange dogs in from the rain and assaults them with rolled-up newspapers. "I'm just a nurse," I stammered, stepping back to create some much-needed distance. "I fix things. That's what I do." "Can you fix me?" he asked. The question hung in the air. It didn't sound like he was talking about the scratches on his shoulder. There was a weight to it, a darkness in his amber eyes that hinted at wounds much older and deeper than the ones I was treating. I swallowed hard, the air in the clinic feeling suddenly thin. "I'm just a nurse, Xander. I treat cuts, bruises, and mange. I don't cure kings." He held my gaze, his expression unreadable. "You kept me warm last night," he said quietly, his eyes dropping to my lips before flicking back up. That felt like a cure to me. I turned away quickly, pretending to organize the instrument tray, my face burning. Just a nurse. I had to remember that. He was a king, and I was just the girl who forgot her glasses. Chapter 9. The Glasses. "Where are they?" I muttered, patting the countertop blindly. I know I left them here. I distinctly remember taking them off to wash my face. The morning light filtering through the cracks in the shutters was giving me a headache. Without my glasses, the world was a soft, fuzzy mess of indistinct shapes and colors. I was squinting at a bottle of pills, trying to decipher if it was amoxicillin or ibuprofen, and failing miserably. "If I put the painkillers in the antibiotic jar, Mrs. Higgins is going to be very confused," I grumbled to myself. A large, blurry shape moved beside me. I stiffened, still getting used to the fact that I wasn't alone. "Looking for these?" Xander asked. He held up something shiny. I squinted. It was the wireframes of my glasses. "Yes! Thank you!" I reached for them, my hand grasping at empty air. He didn't hand them to me. Instead, he stepped closer, closing the gap between us. I froze as he gently unfolded the frames. "Hold still," he murmured. He slid the glasses onto my face with surprising delicacy. His large, calloused fingers brushed against my temples, sending a jolt of electricity through my skin. He adjusted them on the bridge of my nose, his touch lingering for a second longer than necessary. The world snapped into focus, and the first thing I saw was him. I had seen him before, of course. I had seen him naked, I had seen him in scrubs, but I hadn't seen him like this, not in high definition. I saw the flecks of molten gold swimming in his amber eyes. I saw the tiny silver scar cutting through his left eyebrow. I saw the thick, dark lashes that framed his eyes and the sensual curve of his lips. I saw the way his stubble grew in, dark and rugged. My breath caught in my throat. "Oh no," I thought, my heart sinking. "He is devastating." I stared at him, my mouth slightly open, unable to look away. The blurriness had been a shield. Now the full force of his attractiveness hit me like a freight train. Xander saw my reaction. He saw the way my pupils dilated, the way a flush crept up my neck. A slow, arrogant grin spread across his face.
Like what you see, Rhea? He teased, his voice dropping. I can see the dust on the shelves now, I lied, tearing my gaze away and turning toward the medicine cabinet. Very dirty. Terrible. I need to clean. Immediately. He laughed, a rich, deep sound that filled the small room. He reached out and grabbed my hand, stopping me from fleeing to the supply closet. You should wear them more often, he said, running his thumb over the back of my knuckles. You have beautiful eyes. It's a crime to hide them behind a blur. I flushed scarlet, pulling my hand away. Great, the king was hot, he knew he was hot, and now he was flirting with me. I was doomed. I was going to die in this clinic, either by assassin fire or by cardiac arrest caused by a wink. Chapter 10. The Puppy Tease. By afternoon, the adrenaline had worn off, and the boredom had set in. We were stuck. The shutters were sealed, the doors were barricaded, and there was absolutely nothing to do. I was reorganizing the supply cabinet for the third time, counting bandages just to have something to do with my hands. Xander was leaning against the doorframe, looking effortlessly cool despite the ill-fitting scrubs. He was twirling my stethoscope around his finger like a gunslinger with a pistol. So, he mused, breaking the silence. Puppy. I groaned, burying my face in my hands. Please don't. I will literally give you a sedative if you bring that up again. You called the Alpha King of the North puppy. You scratched my ears. You told me I was a good boy. You even used the baby voice. I thought you were a dog, Xander. A very large, muddy, injured dog. It was a reasonable assumption. And if I were a dog, he whispered, pushing off the doorframe and walking toward me, would you still scratch me? I backed up until I hit the cabinet. You are not a dog, Xander. You are a predator. There is a distinct difference. Predators like to be petted too, he murmured. He stopped inches from me. He took my hand, his grip warm and firm, and placed it on his chest, right over his heart. Then he put the earpieces of the stethoscope into my ears. Listen, he commanded softly. I listened. Thump, 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 thump. His heart was strong, steady, powerful. It beat with the rhythm of a war drum. But as I looked up at him, as his amber eyes locked onto mine and held me captive, thump, 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 it sped up. It wasn't fear. It wasn't exertion. Your heart rate is elevated, I whispered, the sound amplified by the stethoscope. It happens, Xander said, leaning down until his nose brushed mine, his gaze dropping to my lips. But I'll be a good boy, he promised, backing away with a wicked wink that made my knees weak. For now. Chapter 11. The Fever. The quiet of the clinic, usually a comfort to me, was shattered by a sound that chilled my blood instantly. Clack, clack, clack. It was the sound of teeth chattering, violent, rhythmic, and coming from the back room. I dropped the paperback novel I had been pretending to read for the last hour and rushed toward the sound. The air in the hallway felt strange, heavy and dry, like the atmosphere before a lightning strike. When I pushed open the door to the small bedroom, the heat hit me like a physical wall. Xander! He was shaking. The tremors were so strong they were rattling the metal frame of the cot against the wall. His skin, usually a rich, healthy golden tan, was flushed and angry, mottled crimson. He had kicked the sheet off and his body was slick with sweat, every muscle coiled tight in agony. I rushed to the bedside, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Xander, can you hear me? I reached out to touch his forehead. I hissed, pulling my hand back instinctively. My God, I whispered, staring at my own fingers. You're burning up. It was like touching a stovetop. The poison from the assassin's blade wasn't gone. It had just been lying dormant, and now it was tearing through his system with a vengeance. Shifter metabolisms ran hot naturally, but this was lethal.
Panic flared in my chest, hot and bright, but I shoved it down. There was no time for fear. Nurse mode activated. Okay, I muttered to myself, spinning on my heel. Cool him down, bring the temperature down. I ran to the clinic's kitchenette and yanked open the freezer. I grabbed everything I could find. Bags of frozen peas, gel packs used for sprained ankles, even a forgotten bag of frozen corn. I piled them into my arms until I could barely see over the top and rushed back to the room. Xander was tossing his head from side to side now, muttering in a language I didn't understand. It sounded ancient, guttural, and terrified. I need to cool you down, I told him, though I knew he wasn't listening. I'm sorry, this is going to be unpleasant. I started packing the ice around him. I tucked the gel packs under his arms where the major arteries ran. I placed the frozen peas against the side of his neck. I laid the corn across his burning forehead. He groaned, a pained, animalistic sound that tore at my heart. His eyes flew open, but they weren't the warm amber I had grown used to. They were black, dilated, wild. Cold, he rasped, his voice a broken shard of glass. So cold, in the dark. I know, I shushed him, grabbing a wet cloth to wipe the sweat from his face. But the heat will kill you. You have to stay with me, puppy. Stay with me. The cot was narrow, barely wide enough for him, let alone both of us. But I didn't care. Disregarding propriety, disregarding the fact that he was a naked king and I was just a nurse, I climbed onto the mattress. I needed to hold the ice packs in place. I needed to use my own body weight to stop his thrashing. I pressed my cool scrub top against his burning skin, wrapping my arms around his shoulders to hold him still. He was a furnace, a dying star going supernova in my spare bedroom, and I was the only thing keeping him from burning out completely.
Chapter 12. The Delirium. Hours passed. The storm outside had died down to a drizzle, but the storm inside Xander was raging. I was exhausted. My arms ached from holding him down during the convulsions, and my own clothes were damp with his sweat. I had replaced the ice packs twice, running back and forth to the freezer like a woman possessed. Finally, around 3 a.m., the violent shaking stopped. He went still. Too still. Xander? I leaned over him, my breath hitching. I pressed 2 fingers to his carotid artery. His pulse was thready, fast, but there. Suddenly, his hand shot up. I gasped as his fingers locked around the back of my neck. His grip was iron, unbreakable. Before I could pull away, he pulled me down. He didn't stop until our foreheads were touching, skin to skin. His breath washed over my face, smelling of metallic tang and intense heat. He wasn't looking at me, not really. His eyes were open, swimming with fever dreams, searching for something that wasn't in the room. Rhea, he breathed. The sound of my name on his lips, spoken with such raw, desperate reverence, made my stomach flip. I'm here, I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm right here, Xander. Mine, he mumbled, his thumbs stroking the sensitive skin at the nape of my neck. Found her. Finally found her. Who did you find? I asked gently, stroking his damp hair back from his forehead. Who did you find? The healer. The mate. My heart stopped. Mate. I lived in the neutral territory, but I knew what that word meant. For shifters, it wasn't just a spouse. It was soul-bound. It was biology and magic and destiny wrapped into one terrifying package. It meant forever. You're hallucinating, I said quickly, my voice shaking. I tried to pull back, panic rising in my throat. It's the fever talking. You don't know what you're saying. He didn't let me go. Instead, he nuzzled his face into my palm, inhaling deeply as if my scent was oxygen and he had been drowning. Smells like rain, he murmured, his eyes fluttering shut.
Smells like home. Tears pricked my eyes. I wasn't home. I was a lonely nurse in a locked clinic with a mountain of student debt and a 3-legged cat. I wasn't a queen. I wasn't a mate. I was just Rhea. But looking at him, broken and vulnerable in my arms, I couldn't bring myself to break the illusion. "Okay," I whispered, my resistance crumbling. I settled back against him, letting him use me as an anchor. "Sleep, Xander." When the fever breaks, I told myself firmly, he won't remember any of this. He'll go back to being the king, and I'll go back to being the nurse. And maybe that's for the best.
Chapter 13. The Leash. I woke up with a crick in my neck and a heavy weight pinning my legs to the mattress. Sunlight was filtering through the blinds, brighter than yesterday. I blinked, disoriented, before the memories of the night rushed back. The fever, the ice, the word. I looked down. Xander was asleep, but he looked different. The angry red flush was gone, replaced by his natural golden hue. His breathing was deep, even, and untroubled. The heat radiating from him was no longer a furnace, but a comfortable warmth. He had survived. His shifter healing had kicked in and burned the poison out. I tried to slide my legs out from under his massive calves. His eyes snapped open. There was no grogginess, no confusion, just instant, razor-sharp clarity. The black pits of the fever were gone, replaced by pure, predatory amber. "Leaving so soon?" he drawled, his voice rough with sleep but amused. I need coffee," I stammered, scrambling off the cot and nearly tripping over my own feet. "And you need water. You're dehydrated." I hurried out of the room, my heart racing. I needed space. The mate comment was ringing in my ears like a church bell. He doesn't remember, I told myself. He was delirious. I busied myself at the front desk, making a pot of coffee with shaking hands. I needed caffeine, and I needed to pretend that I hadn't spent the night cuddling a warlord. I heard him moving behind me, the heavy, silent pad of bare feet on the linoleum. I reached for my favorite mug, the one with a cat hanging off a branch that said, "Hang in there," when I felt something cool and metal loop around my neck. I froze. I looked down. It was the chest piece of my stethoscope. Xander was standing directly behind me, holding the ends of the tubing like reins, like a leash. He pulled gently, drawing me back until my spine collided with his hard, bare chest. "You took good care of me, nurse. I remember." He whispered into my ear. His voice was low, intimate, and stripped of the vulnerability from the night before. I swallowed hard. You were delirious," I breathed. "You didn't know what you were saying." "Didn't I?" He tugged the stethoscope again, forcing me to tilt my head back. He leaned over, his face upside down in my vision, his lips hovering inches from mine. "Now I'm all better." He purred, the vibration traveling through my back. "And I think the roles have reversed." "What do you mean?" I squeaked. "You spent all night holding me down. You put ice on me. You told me what to do." He released one end of the stethoscope and trailed his finger down my arm, raising goosebumps in his wake. "Who's the good girl now?" My knees went weak. The dynamic had shifted so fast it gave me whiplash. The patient was gone. The king was back, and he looked very, very hungry.
Chapter 14. The Chase. The clinic felt smaller today. The air was charged with static electricity, heavy and thick. I tried to work. I really did. I filed papers that were already alphabetized. I scrubbed the floors that were already clean. I even reorganized the treat jars by color. But I could feel him. Xander didn't just walk. He prowled. He'd move from room to room, silent as a shadow, always keeping me in his peripheral vision. He was testing his strength, stretching his limbs, and, I was increasingly certain, toying with me.
"Stop following me," I said, spinning around in the hallway after feeling his gaze on the back of my neck for the 10th time. The hallway was empty. "Xander," I called out, frowning. "I'm not following." His voice echoed from the open door of the exam room to my left. It sounded amused. "I'm hunting." Oh God. He was bored. He was a high-energy alpha predator locked in a small building with nothing to do, and he had decided I was the entertainment. I squeaked and power-walked toward the break room. "I am busy. I have inventory to do." Thud, thud. Footsteps behind me, fast, heavy. Adrenaline spiked in my veins. It was ridiculous. I was a grown woman running through my own place of business, but a laugh bubbled up in my throat, breathless and giddy. It was a game, a dangerous, exhilarating game of tag. I broke into a run. I darted past the front desk and ducked into the X-ray room, slamming the heavy lead-lined door shut. I leaned against it, panting, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm. Safe, I thought. "Gotcha," a voice whispered right next to my ear. I shrieked, jumping a foot in the air. He was already there. He was leaning against the light box, arms crossed, looking smug. How did he move that fast? He must have circled around through the prep room. I backed up until my shoulder blades hit the cool, lead-lined wall. Xander pushed off the light box and stepped toward me. He placed his hands on the wall on either side of my head, boxing me in. He was grimming. It wasn't a nice grin. It was a wolfish, wicked grin that promised trouble. "You're fast," I panted, trying to catch my breath. "I'm the king," he reminded me, leaning in closer. "You can't outrun me, Rhea. Not in here, not anywhere." "I wasn't trying to run," I lied, lifting my chin defiantly. "I was, checking the structural integrity of the door." He laughed softly, the sound rumbling in his chest. His gaze dropped from my eyes to my neck, where my pulse was fluttering wildly beneath the skin. "Good," he murmured, his eyes darkening, "because I'm done chasing."
Chapter 15. The Exam Table. The air in the X-ray room was suffocatingly hot, despite the ventilation. Xander didn't back away. Instead, he stepped closer, invading my personal space until his hips brushed against mine. "Up," he said softly. "What?" I blinked, my brain short-circuiting. He didn't wait for me to process the command. He grabbed me by the waist, his large hands spanning nearly my entire torso, and lifted me effortlessly into the air. He set me down on the edge of the tall exam table that sat in the center of the room. Now, I was eye level with him. I was sitting, my legs dangling, and he was standing between my spread knees. The position was obscenely intimate, the fabric of his scrubs brushing against the inside of my thighs. "Time for your checkup," he whispered, echoing the words I had said to him when he was a muddy dog on this very table. "I'm not the patient," I managed to whisper, though my voice lacked any real conviction. "No," he agreed. He reached out and traced the line of my jaw with a calloused thumb. His touch was electric, sending shivers erupting down my spine. "Your heart is racing," he said, his eyes scanning my face with intense focus. "Your pupils are dilated. Your breathing is shallow." "Diagnosis?" I challenged, my voice trembling. "Arousal," he murmured, leaning in until his lips brushed the corner of my mouth. He didn't kiss me. He just hovered there, teasing, tormenting. I held my breath, waiting for the kiss, wanting it. My body was betraying me, leaning into him, craving the contact. "You want this," he said against my skin, his voice rough. "You want the monster." "I want the man," I whispered back. A low growl vibrated in his chest, a sound of pure possession. "You get both," he promised. And then he didn't kiss my lips. He buried his face in the sensitive crook of my neck and inhaled deeply, his teeth grazing the skin over my pulse point. The threat and the promise of the bite hung in the air. Heavy,
inevitable, and terrifyingly welcome.
Chapter 16. The Taming. The air in the X-ray room was thick enough to choke on. It tasted of ozone, antiseptic, and raw, unfiltered desire. Xander's face was buried in the curve of my neck, his hot breath ghosting over my skin, his lips moving down, down, down toward the collar of my scrubs. I gripped his shoulders, my fingers digging into the hard ridges of muscle beneath the thin fabric. He was overwhelming, a force of nature, a landslide of sensation that threatened to bury me completely. If I let him take control now, a voice whispered in the back of my mind, I'll never get it back. He was a king. He was an alpha. He was used to taking what he wanted when he wanted it. If I let him consume me now, I would just be another conquest, another subject. I needed to remind him who held the leash. I needed to remind him who had bathed him, fed him, and saved his life. Stop, I commanded. I didn't whisper it. I didn't ask. I pushed against his chest with the heels of my hands, using every ounce of strength I had. Xander froze. He pulled back slowly, blinking. His amber eyes were clouded with lust and genuine confusion. A low, vibrating growl rumbled in his throat, a protest, a warning. I didn't say you could start, I told him. My voice trembled slightly, but I locked my knees around his waist, holding my ground. He stared at me, his chest heaving. Rhea, you said you were going to be a good boy, I said, tilting my head. I moved my hand from his shoulder to his hair, winding my fingers into the dark locks at the base of his skull. I tugged, hard. His pupils blew wide. He looked at me with a mixture of shock and dawning realization. You want me? I asked, softly, tracing the shell of his ear. More than my next breath, he rasped, the confession torn from his throat. Then ask, nicely. The silence that followed was heavy. He stared at me, the ruthless alpha king of the north, the warlord who had leveled cities. Begging? It went against every instinct he had. I could see the war behind his eyes, the dominance fighting with the devotion. I leaned forward, brushing my nose against his. Come on, Xander. Who's a good boy? A shudder went through his massive frame. The tension in his shoulders broke. His eyes darkened, shifting from predatory to something deeper, something submissive. He realized the game, and God help us both, he liked it. Slowly, deliberately, he sank down. He lowered his massive body until his knees hit the linoleum floor. He looked up at me, his hands resting on my thighs, his expression a potent mix of worship and hunger. He was on his knees for me. The king was bowing to the nurse. Please, he growled, his voice rough like gravel grinding together. He pressed his face against my stomach. Please, mistress. Chapter 17. The Edge. The word hung in the air, charging the room with electricity that made the hair on my arms stand up. Mistress. Xander didn't wait for a verbal answer. He took my silence and the sharp intake of my breath as the permission he craved. His hands gripped my thighs, his thumbs digging into the soft flesh, parting them further. The sensation sent jolts of fire straight to my core. Watching him down there, kneeling on the cold clinic floor, while I sat perched on the exam table, was the most powerful I had ever felt. This massive, lethal creature, who could snap my neck with a flick of his wrist, was completely at my mercy. He leaned forward. His breath ghosted over me, hot and damp through the fabric of my scrub pants. Rhea. He groaned against the fabric. Then his hands moved to the waistband. He didn't rip them. He peeled them away with a reverence that was almost holy. When he finally tasted me, I threw my head back,
a gasp tearing from my throat that echoed off the lead-lined walls. Xander? He wasn't gentle. He was starving. He devoured me with a focus that was terrifying and exhilarating. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. He knew exactly what he was doing. My hands found his hair, gripping tight, anchoring myself as the world began to spin. The room narrowed down to the friction, the heat, the wet slide of his tongue. I forgot about the assassins outside. I forgot about the storm. I forgot my own name. There was only him. So sweet, he murmured against me, the vibration traveling through my body like a shockwave. The pressure built fast, too fast. It was a cresting wave, pulling me under. I arched my back, my heels digging into his shoulders. Please, I was the one begging now. The power dynamic shifted again, fluid as water. Xander, please. He slowed down. I whined, a frustrated sound that I couldn't suppress. He looked up. His chin was wet, his lips swollen, his eyes glowing like twin suns in the dim light. He looked like a demon. He looked like a god. Not yet, he promised darkly. He returned to his work, but softer this time, slower, torturing me, edging me. He brought me to the precipice of oblivion and then pulled me back over and over again. I want to watch you break, he growled, his voice vibrating against my skin. I want to see you shatter.
Chapter 18. The Claiming. I was a puddle, a boneless, shaking mess on the exam table. My nerves were fried, my skin overly sensitive, and my breath coming in short, jagged gasps. Xander stood up. He loomed over me, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, looking satisfied and predatory. The hunger in his eyes hadn't abated. It had only grown sharper. My turn, he growled. He didn't give me time to recover. He scooped me up into his arms like I weighed nothing, burying his face in my neck as he carried me out of the exam room. We moved through the darkened clinic, a tangle of limbs and heartbeats, until we reached the small back bedroom. He laid me on the narrow bed and followed me down instantly, his heavy body pressing me into the mattress. The sensation of his skin against mine was electric. Clothes were gone. I didn't even remember them coming off. It was just heat, friction, and the smell of rain and musk. When he finally entered me, it wasn't just a physical connection. Boom. A shock wave went through the room. The overhead light bulb flickered and burst with a loud pop, plunging us into darkness. We both gasped, freezing for a second. Mine. A voice echoed in my head. It wasn't my voice. It was deep, resonant, and ancient. It was him. Did you hear that? I whispered into the dark, my hands clutching his biceps. I felt it. He gritted out, moving against me. The bond, it snapping into place. The pleasure was agonizing, intense, and all-consuming. It felt like my soul was being stitched to his. As we moved together, the rhythm frantic and desperate, I felt a pressure building that was deeper than the physical release. He lowered his head to the crook of my neck. I felt the sharp point of his canines grazing my skin. My survival instinct screamed, run. My heart screamed, stay. This was the claiming, the bite. It was permanent. It was a declaration of war against anyone else who would ever try to touch me. I tilted my head to the side, baring my throat to the king. Do it, I breathed. He bit down. It was a sharp, stinging pain that made me cry out, followed instantly by a rush of endorphins so strong it felt like flying. He laughed at the mark, his tongue soothing the wound, sealing the bond. You are mine, Rhea, he whispered against my skin, his voice thick with emotion. By blood
and by bond. No one takes what is mine.
Chapter 19. The Threat. The next morning was peaceful. The storm had finally passed, leaving the world outside scrubbed clean and quiet. I lay in Xander's arms, tracing the intricate tribal tattoo on his chest with my fingertip. The mark on my neck throbbed, a dull, possessive ache that reminded me with every heartbeat that I was no longer just a nurse. "So," I whispered, breaking the silence, "does this mean I'm a queen now? Do I get a crown? Because I look terrible in hats." Xander chuckled, a deep rumble that shook the bed frame. He tightened his arm around me. "You get whatever you want, Rhea. A crown, a castle, a pony." "I already have a pony," I teased, poking his solid chest. "He's just really high maintenance and bites people." "He only bites bad people," he corrected, kissing the top of my head. "And sometimes the mailman." He shifted, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at me. The fierceness in his eyes had softened into adoration. "Be my queen, Rhea. Stay here, rule with me." "I can't rule a kingdom, Xander. I can barely manage the inventory for the clinic." "I'll build you a hospital, the biggest in the north. State of the art, you can save everyone. No more sketchy clinics with bad locks and leaking roofs. You can run it however you want." My mouth fell open. He remembered. I had mentioned my dream of a real hospital days ago, in passing. "You're trying to bribe me with medical equipment?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Is it working?" he asked, hopefully. "An MRI machine and a king who worships the ground I walk on?" I sighed happily. "Yeah, it's working." "I love you, Rhea," he said, his face serious. "I love you too." Bang! 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 The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet morning. We both froze. The heavy, rhythmic pounding came from the front door of the clinic. The playful atmosphere evaporated instantly. The air went cold. "Open up!" a muffled voice shouted from outside. "By order of Lady Vesper." The blood drained from my face. Xander was out of bed in a split second. He didn't look like my lover anymore. He looked like the beast. His lips pulled back from his teeth, a low growl tearing from his chest. "They've found us," he snarled. Chapter 20. The Act. "Hide," I hissed, shoving a pair of scrub pants at Xander. "I am not hiding," he growled, pulling the pants on but looking ready to murder the door. "I am going to rip their throats out." "You are still healing," I argued, pushing him toward the supply closet. "If they see the king, they'll kill you on sight. They'll burn the building down. If they see a nurse, they might just ask questions and leave." He hesitated, his hand on the doorframe. He looked at the front door, where the pounding was getting louder, and then back at me. "Please," I begged, my hands shaking. "Trust me, I can handle this." He ground his teeth, his jaw working. "If they touch you, I'll scream, I promise. Go." He kissed me hard, brief and desperate, then slipped into the narrow supply closet, pulling the door almost shut. I took a deep breath. I threw on my robe, messed up my hair to look like I'd been sleeping, and marched to the front door. I unlocked the deadbolt. Showtime. I yanked the door open. 3 men stood on the stoop. They wore black tactical gear emblazoned with a silver crest, a coiled serpent, Vesper's vipers. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" I cranked up the annoyance, channeling every grumpy receptionist I had ever met. "I'm closed. Can a girl get some sleep?" The leader stepped forward. He was a tall, gaunt man with pale skin and a nose that looked like a hawk's beak. He didn't speak immediately. He tilted his head, his nostrils flaring. He sniffed. His eyes narrowed, fixing on me with a reptilian intensity. He leaned closer, invading my personal space. "I smell alpha," he rasped. His voice sounded like dry leaves skittering on pavement. "Fresh alpha." My heart hammered against my ribs, threatening to bruise them.
My hand flew instinctively to my neck, covering the bite mark. I treated a wolf yesterday, I stammered, the lie tasting like ash on my tongue. Big guy, had the flu. He left hours ago. The captain smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who enjoyed pulling wings off flies. Is that so? He reached out, his movement faster than a snake strike. He grabbed my wrist and yanked my hand away from my neck. The fresh, angry red bite mark, Xander's claim, was visible for the world to see. That is not a flu shot, darling, the captain sneered, his eyes gleaming with triumph. That is a royal claim. He drew his sword, the metal singing as it left the scabbard. Tear the place apart, he commanded his men. The king is here.
Chapter 21. The Capture. The clinic exploded into violence before the captain's command had even finished echoing off the walls. The door to the supply closet didn't open, it disintegrated. Wood splinters flew like shrapnel as a roar shook the very foundations of the building, rattling the teeth in my skull. Xander burst out, a blur of rage, muscle, and lethal intent. He moved faster than the human eye could track. He didn't look like a man anymore. He was a force of destruction. He took the first soldier's head off with a single, vicious swipe of his claws, the sound of tearing metal and bone sickeningly loud. He gutted the second man before the soldier could even scream, tossing the body aside like a broken doll. But the captain, the gaunt man with the snake crest, was fast, and he was a coward. He didn't turn to fight the beast. He turned to me. I screamed as he grabbed my hair, yanking my head back. Pain exploded in my scalp. He twisted my arm behind my back with agonizing force and pressed a cold, serrated blade against my jugular. "Stop!" the captain shrieked, his voice cracking with fear. "One step closer, beast, and the nurse bleeds out." Xander froze. He was 5 feet away. He was covered in blood, his chest heaving, his claws extended and dripping. His amber eyes were dilated, black with the red haze of battle fury, but they were locked on the knife at my throat. The growl that rumbled in his chest was subsonic, vibrating through the floorboards and up into my legs. "Let her go," Xander growled, his voice vibrating with suppressed power. It wasn't a request, it was a promise of eternal suffering if he didn't comply. "Surrender," the captain sneered, though his hand was trembling against my neck. "Get on your knees, king, or she dies right now." I looked at Xander. I saw the hesitation. I saw the calculation. He would do it. He would let them chain him, beat him, and drag him back to Vesper to save me. And once they had him, Vesper would kill him slowly. She would break him. I couldn't let that happen. I wouldn't let him be the pet they wanted him to be. "Don't surrender," I choked out, tears stinging my eyes. "Rhea," Xander started, stepping forward. "Stay back," the captain yelled, pressing the knife harder. A thin line of blood trickled down my neck. I made a choice. "Run, Xander!" I screamed. I stomped on the captain's instep with all the force my terrorized body could muster. At the same moment, I threw my weight backward, slamming my head into his nose. We hit the floor in a tangle of limbs. The knife sliced my arm, a searing, hot line of pain, but I was free for a split second. "Run!" I screamed again, scrambling away on the bloody floor. But Xander didn't run. He lunged for me. He was too late. The captain, nose broken and bleeding, slammed the heavy hilt of his sword into my temple. The world exploded into white light, then faded instantly to gray. The last thing I heard before the darkness took me completely was Xander's howl of pure, unadulterated agony. It was the sound of a heart breaking. Chapter 22. The Dungeon. I woke up to the smell of mold, damp stone, and old despair. My head throbbed with a rhythm that matched the pulsing ache in my arm. I tried to move, but cold iron bit into my wrists. I blinked my eyes open, the grit of the floor scratching my cheek. I was chained to a wall in a dimly lit cell. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. Drip, 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 marking the passing of time in the dark.
Vesper's dungeon, I realized with a jolt of terror. The sound of heels clicking on stone approached. Sharp, purposeful steps. I looked up through the iron bars. Lady Vesper stood there. She was beautiful in the way an ice storm is beautiful. Cruel, pale, and lethal. She wore a gown of shimmering silver, her hair perfectly coiffed, her lips painted a blood red. She looked me up and down with a curled lip, as if I were a cockroach she had found on her shoe. "So," she mused, her voice light and airy, "this is the creature that tamed the Wolf King. A human nurse. How pedestrian." I swallowed the dry lump in my throat. "I didn't tame him," I rasped, my voice sounding like sandpaper. "He's not a pet." "Oh, he is a pet, darling. He's just on the wrong leash. He was born to serve, and once I kill you, I'll break him until he eats from my hand and begs for scraps." "You're insane," I whispered. "I am ambitious," she corrected. "There is a difference." She turned to the guards flanking her. "Prepare the execution block. I want his head to be the last thing he sees." As she spoke, a sensation hit me. The mark on my neck, the bite Xander had given me, flared hot. It wasn't pain. It was a searing heat that spread down my spine and into my chest. It felt like a physical connection, a live wire snapping into place. I gasped, my back arching off the cold stone. I felt him, through the bond. It felt like a tidal wave of darkness, rage, hunger, violence. It wasn't the man I had slept with. It wasn't the playful puppy who wanted scratches. It was the monster. And he wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He was coming. I started to laugh. It was a weak, hysterical sound, but it made Vesper stop and turn back to me. "Something funny, little nurse?" she sneered. "He's coming," I whispered, looking her dead in the eye. I could feel his heartbeat syncing with mine. Thump thump. Thump thump. Vesper's smile faltered. "He wouldn't dare. My fortress is impenetrable." "You don't understand," I told her, shaking my head. "He's not coming to negotiate, and he's not coming to eat from your hand." The ground beneath us trembled. A distant boom echoed through the stone walls. "He's coming to rip it off."
Chapter 23. The Beast Returns. I closed my eyes, and through the bond, I saw what was happening. It was like watching a nightmare through a kaleidoscope of red rage and shadow. The gates of Vesper's fortress were made of iron-reinforced oak, designed to withstand a siege engine. They were 6 inches thick and barred with steel. They didn't withstand Xander. He didn't come as a man. He didn't come as a standard wolf. He came as the nightmare the bedtime stories warned us about. He had shifted fully into his war form, a massive midnight wolf, standing nearly 5 feet at the shoulder. He was a creature of shadow and muscle and death, his fur absorbing the light. I felt the impact in my own bones as he hit the gates at full speed. Wood splintered, iron groaned and sheared. With a second impact, the massive gates flew off their hinges as if they were made of cardboard, crushing the guards standing behind them. Panic erupted in the courtyard. I could hear the screams echoing down into the dungeon, filtered through layers of stone. "Fire!" someone screamed. Arrows rained down from the battlements. They bounced off his thick hide like toothpicks. Spears shattered against his ribs. He was unstoppable. He was inevitable. Xander tore through the courtyard. He was a blur of black fur and flashing white teeth. He didn't stop to fight. He simply ran through them. Men in armor were tossed aside like ragdolls. Limbs were severed. The snow turned red. He had a scent. One scent. It cut through the blood and the smoke and the chaos. Rhea. Rhea. Rhea.
The name pulsed in my mind, a chant of desperation and fury. The red haze had taken him completely. Anyone standing between him and his mate was not a person. They were just meat. They were obstacles to be removed. I felt his claws digging into the stone as he breached the inner sanctum. I felt the heat of his breath. I felt the singular, consuming need to find me. In my cell, I slumped against the wall, tears streaming down my face. I wasn't crying from fear. I was crying because I had unleashed a monster upon the world, and I knew, with terrifying certainty, that he would burn the entire kingdom to ash just to get to me.
Chapter 24. The Rescue. The ground shook violently, dust raining down from the dungeon ceiling. The screams were getting closer. They were no longer distant echoes. They were right outside the heavy wooden door at the top of the stairs. Vesper looked nervous now. The arrogance had bled out of her face, leaving her pale and trembling. She drew a jeweled dagger from her belt. "Guard the door," she shrieked to her remaining men, her voice shrill. "Don't let anything through." The heavy wooden door didn't open, it exploded. Fragments of oak flew across the room. A body, one of Vesper's elite guards, flew down the stone stairs, tumbling end over end until he landed in a crumpled, broken heap at my feet. Silence fell over the dungeon, a heavy, suffocating silence. Then he appeared. Xander stood at the top of the stairs. He had shifted back to his human form to navigate the narrow passage, but he looked no less terrifying. He was drenched in blood from head to toe. None of it was his. It dripped from his fingertips, from his hair, from his chin. His chest heaved with exertion. His amber eyes were glowing so brightly they lit up the gloomy stairwell like flares. They scanned the room, bypassing the guards, bypassing Vesper, until they locked onto me. "Kill him!" Vesper screamed, backing away until she hit the far wall. "Kill him now!" Two guards, driven by fear more than loyalty, charged up the stairs with spears leveled. Xander didn't even slow down. He didn't dodge. He caught the first spear shaft in his bare hand, snapped it like a twig, and drove the jagged end into the guard's throat. In the same motion, he backhanded the second guard with enough force to snap the man's neck instantly. He stepped over the bodies. He walked down the stairs, one heavy step at a time. Thud, thud, thud. The only sound in the room was the drip, drip, drip of blood falling from his hands to the stone floor. He stopped 10 feet away from the cell. He ignored Vesper completely. He looked at me, changed to the wall, bruised and bleeding. The rage in his eyes flickered, replaced for a second by agonizing pain. "Rhea," he grunted. It was a guttural sound, barely human, torn from a throat raw with howling. I choked on a sob, pulling uselessly at my chains. "Hi, puppy!" Chapter 25. The Payoff. Vesper realized her mistake. She had no guards left. She was trapped in a stone box with a creature she had tried to enslave. Desperation made her fast. She lunged toward me, grabbing my hair and hauling me up. She pressed her dagger to my throat, right over the pulse point. "Stay back!" she shrieked, her eyes wide and manic. "I'll kill her, I swear it. I'll slice her open before you can take another step." Xander stopped. He went unnaturally still. He tilted his head to the side, regarding her with a cold, detached curiosity. A terrifying smile spread across his bloody face. It wasn't a smile of amusement. It was the smile of a predator who has cornered its prey. "You think you're fast enough?" he asked, softly. His voice was calm, too calm. Vesper's hand trembled. You think you can move your hand faster than I can move mine?" he taunted, taking a microscopic step forward. "Try it." Vesper hesitated. That split second of doubt was all he needed. Xander moved. It was faster than sight.
One moment he was 10 feet away, the next he was a blur of motion. He didn't go for her throat, he went for the weapon. His hand clamped around Vesper's wrist. There was a sickening snap that echoed off the stone walls. Vesper screamed as her wrist shattered. The dagger clattered uselessly to the floor. Xander didn't monologue. He didn't explain his master plan. He simply grabbed Vesper by the throat and lifted her off the ground, her feet kicking helplessly in the air. "You touched what is mine," he whispered. It was a statement of fact, a verdict delivered by a king. He squeezed. Crunch. Vesper went limp instantly. He dropped her body like a sack of trash, stepping over her without a second glance. He tore the iron door of my cell off its hinges as if it were made of paper. He was in front of me. He ripped the chains from the wall, freeing me. The dungeon was silent. Xander stood there, his chest heaving, blood dripping from his chin. He turned to me. The rage was still swirling in his eyes, the red haze threatening to consume him. He looked ready to kill anything that moved. He was vibrating with adrenaline and violence. I should have been terrified. He was covered in gore. He had just snapped a woman's neck, and he looked like a monster. But he was my monster. I reached out with my uninjured hand. I touched his bloody cheek. "Come here," I whispered softly. "It's over." The tension snapped. The monster crumbled. He fell to his knees in front of me, burying his bloody face in my lap, his arms wrapping around my waist in a crushing grip. He shook uncontrollably, great racking sobs tearing through him. "I've got you," I soothed, stroking his matted, blood-soaked hair as if he were a puppy frightened by thunder. "I've got you, Xander. I'm safe."
Chapter 26. The Aftermath. The royal palace was a fortress of ice and stone, huge, cold, and intimidating. But the king's private chambers were surprisingly warm. A roaring fire crackled in a hearth big enough to roast an ox, casting dancing shadows against walls hung with heavy tapestries. Xander kicked the heavy oak door shut behind him with a resounding thud. He hadn't put me down once since we left the dungeon. He had carried me through the courtyard, into the carriage, and up the grand staircase as if I were made of precious, cracked glass. He moved to the bed, a massive four-poster monstrosity draped in velvet, and set me down with excruciating gentleness. The sheets were silk, cool and smooth against my skin, a stark contrast to the scratchy cotton of my clinic cot. "Stay," he murmured, brushing a strand of matted hair from my forehead. He disappeared into the adjoining bathroom and returned a moment later with a basin of steaming water, a stack of plush towels, and a medical kit that looked like it had been stolen from my own clinic. I watched him. He had washed the worst of the blood off himself in a horse trough in the courtyard, but he still looked wild. His hair was damp and tangled, his shirt was torn, and his eyes were tracing every bruise and cut on my skin with a desperate, hungry intensity. "My turn," he whispered, dipping a cloth into the warm water. He knelt between my legs on the edge of the bed. It was a callback, a perfect reversal of that first night when I had scrubbed the mud from his flank. "This is going to sting," he warned, his voice rough. He cleaned the cut on my arm with hands that shook slightly. The great, lethal king who had just massacred an entire garrison without blinking was terrified of hurting me. He treated the shallow wound as if it were a mortal injury, applying antiseptic and wrapping it in gauze with surgical precision. "I let them take you," he rasped, not looking at me. His voice was thick with guilt, heavy as a stone. I smelled them coming, and I wasn't fast enough. I failed. I reached out with my uninjured hand and cupped his cheek, forcing him to look at me. His eyes were haunted, the amber dimmed by self-loathing. "You didn't fail," I told him fiercely. "You came for me. You destroyed a fortress for me. You snapped a woman's wrist like a twig for me." "I should have burned the world," he vowed.
turning his face into my palm and kissing the center of my hand. I will burn it, Rhea. If anyone ever looks at you wrong again, I will turn this kingdom to ash. Let's start small, I suggested, offering him a weak, tired smile. Just maybe install a better security system at the clinic, and maybe a lock that doesn't require a key from 1980? He froze. Then a small, jagged laugh escaped him. It was the first real smile I had seen on his face in days, and it broke the tension in the room like a hammer. Done, he breathed, leaning his forehead against mine. Whatever you want, it's done.
Chapter 27. The Proposal. 3 days later, I was healed. The bond I shared with Xander was doing more than just letting me feel his moods. His wolf regeneration was rubbing off on me. The cut on my arm was a faint pink line, and the bruises had faded to yellow memories. I was standing on the balcony of the royal suite, wrapped in a silk robe that cost more than my car. I was looking out over the capital city of the north. It was breathtaking. A sprawling cityscape of stone and snow nestled in a valley between jagged mountains. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the distant hum of life drifted up to the palace. I felt him before I heard him, a warmth at my back, a shift in the air pressure. Xander wrapped his massive arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. He smelled of sandalwood and fresh snow. "Do you like it?" he asked, his voice a low rumble against my spine. "It's a nice view," I admitted, leaning back into his solid heat. "Very majestic." "I'll give it to you," he said, casually, as if he were offering me a sandwich. "The view?" "The city," he corrected, tightening his hold. "The kingdom, everything the light touches. It's yours." He turned me around to face him. He looked nervous. The man who had faced down an army of vipers was fidgeting with the cuff of his velvet jacket. "Be my queen, Rhea. Stay here. Rule with me. I don't want to run this place alone. I need my mate." I opened my mouth, but he held up a hand, cutting me off. "I know what you're going to say. You miss the clinic. You miss fixing people." He took a deep breath. "I'll build you a hospital. The biggest in the north. State-of-the-art. MRI machines, surgical suites, a trauma center that can handle shifters and humans. You can save everyone, Rhea. No more sketchy clinics with bad locks. You can run the whole thing." My heart swelled so big I thought it might burst. He remembered. I had mentioned my dream of a real hospital once, late at night when we were locked in the clinic, thinking we might die. "Are you trying to bribe me with medical equipment?" I asked, raising an eyebrow, trying to maintain my composure. "Is it working?" he asked hopefully, his amber eyes wide and vulnerable. "An MRI machine and a king who worships the ground I walk on." I pretended to think about it. "Yeah, it's working." Chapter 28. The Refusal. Joke. I crossed my arms over my chest, biting the inside of my cheek to keep from grinning. I wanted to see him sweat just a little bit more. "I don't know, Xander," I sighed dramatically, looking back out at the snowy city. "Being a queen sounds like a lot of work. Heavy crowns, boring speeches, state dinners with people who want to kill us. Plus, I have a cat. Tripod hates moving." Panic flashed across his face, genuine, unadulterated panic. His hands hovered near my waist, afraid to grab me, but desperate to keep me. "Rhea, we can get a carriage for the cat. A royal carriage. With tuna?" He looked lost. "I can hire a speechwriter. You don't have to wear the heavy crown. I'll wear two." I couldn't hold it back anymore. A small snort of laughter escaped me. "However," I interrupted, holding up a finger, "I might consider it, on one condition." "Anything," he promised immediately.
The relief that washed over him was palpable. "Name it. If you want the moon, I'll find a way to pull it down." I leaned in close, standing on my tiptoes so my lips brushed his ear. "I accept, but only if I can still call you puppy." He froze. He pulled back to look at me, horror dawning in his eyes. "In public?" he whispered, glancing around the empty balcony as if the royal guard might be listening. "Rhea, I am the Wolf King, the scourge of the North. You can't call me puppy in front of the High Council." "In private, then," I conceded, tracing the line of his jaw. "And maybe when you're being a bad boy, or a particularly good one." He let out a breath he'd been holding, his shoulders sagging. Then a wicked, familiar grin spread across his face. The arrogance was back, tempered by love. "If you call me puppy," he murmured, pulling me flush against him until our hips ground together, "then I expect to be petted. Thoroughly. Behind the ears, and everywhere else." "It's a deal," I whispered. He kissed me, sealing the contract. "It's a deal, my queen."
Chapter 29. The Wedding. The wedding was the event of the century. The royal cathedral was a cavernous space of stained glass and vaulted stone, packed to the rafters with alphas, dignitaries, and wolves from every pack in the territory. The scent of 1,000 shifters was overwhelming: pine, musk, earth, and power. Flowers cascaded from the ceiling in waterfalls of white and green. The organ swelled, vibrating in the floorboards. I walked down the aisle. I wasn't wearing white. I was wearing gold. A shimmering, liquid silk gown that matched the color of his eyes. Xander waited at the altar. He looked devastating. He wore a black, ceremonial suit embroidered with gold thread that depicted the history of his bloodline. His hair was tied back, revealing the sharp angles of his face. He looked every inch the king, stern, powerful, and terrifying. Until he saw me. When our eyes met, the king vanished and only Xander remained. His expression softened into something so raw and open, it made my breath hitch. We didn't do standard vows. We wrote our own. "I, Xander, Alpha of the North," his voice boomed through the silent cathedral, "give you my heart, my soul, and my sword. I will protect you until the stars burn out. Your enemies are my enemies. Your pain is my pain." "I, Rhea," I said, my voice steady, "give you my heart, my hands, and my life. I will heal you when you hurt, and I will guide you when you are lost. I will be your calm in the storm." Then came the exchange of gifts. I didn't give him a ring. I reached into a velvet box held by the officiant. Xander leaned down, submitting before his entire court so I could reach him. I fastened a heavy, intricate gold chain around his neck. It settled against his throat, heavy and binding. It was subtle, hidden under his collar, but everyone in the front row saw what it was. A collar. A gasp went through the crowd. The ruthless Alpha King wearing a collar? Xander didn't flinch. He kissed the gold medal, then looked up at me with eyes shining with devotion. "Yours," he mouthed to me. "Always." The crowd erupted into cheers, or maybe howls, as he grabbed me and kissed me. The beast had been tamed, or maybe, judging by the way I gripped his lapels and pulled him closer, the nurse had just gone feral. Chapter 30. Epilogue. 1 year later. The Royal Hospital of the North was bustling. It was everything Xander had promised and more. The floors sparkled, the equipment was cutting edge, and the waiting room was full of humans and shifters sitting side by side. I adjusted my glasses, signing a digital chart with a flourish. "Okay, Mr. Miller, you're good to go. Stay off that leg for 2 weeks. And tell your wolf to stop chasing delivery trucks." Mr. Miller chuckled and hobbled off.
I stretched, rolling my neck. It had been a long shift, but a good one. Suddenly, the double doors to the emergency room burst open with a violent bang. Nurses scattered. A hush fell over the room. A massive shape strode in. King Xander. He was wearing his royal armor, looking like he had just come from a war council. He looked frantic. His hair was wild, his eyes wide. "Rhea," he bellowed, his voice shaking the sterile tiles. My heart dropped. "I'm here," I shouted, stepping out of an exam room. "What's wrong? Are we under attack? Is it an assassination attempt?" I ran toward him, reaching for my trauma shears. Xander skidded to a halt in front of me. He was breathing hard. He cupped his massive hands together against his chest, shielding something precious. "Rhea," he gasped. "I found it. In the rain. Near the east gate." He slowly opened his hands. Nestled in the center of his giant, calloused palms was a kitten. It couldn't have been more than 4 weeks old. It was soaking wet, shivering, and looked like a drowned rat. It let out a tiny, pathetic mew. "It was crying," the giant king whispered, looking absolutely heartbroken. His lip wobbled. "It was all alone. Can we keep it? Tripod needs a friend." I stared at him. I looked at the nurses peeking out from behind the desk. I looked at my husband, the most feared alpha in the world, the slayer of armies, cradling a 3-ounce ball of fluff like it was a nuclear bomb. My heart melted into a puddle on the floor. "Oh, Xander," I laughed, tears prickling my eyes. I reached out and scratched the kitten's head, then scratched Xander behind the ear. "You really are a sucker for strays, aren't you?" A slow, boyish smirk spread across his face. He pulled me close with one arm, sandwiching the kitten safely between us. "I kept you, didn't I?" he murmured, kissing my forehead. Outside, the rain fell softly against the glass, but inside, everything was warm.